Hey guys, welcome to another Psych-based video. Today we're going to cover Cooper and Mackie. We've already covered most of criminal psychology on the channel, and so in just 5 minutes you'll have your knowledge of Cooper and Mackie all up to standard. Now I do think that Cooper and Mackie can get quite complicated because there's so many variables and conditions and things to remember, so I'm going to try my best to keep it as simple as possible so that it can get you through your exams. Let's get into it. So the aim of the study was to investigate whether video games can cause violence. And this obviously links in with social learning theory quite well, as social learning theory says we learn through observation. So if that's true, then by watching somebody playing a video game, an aggressive video game, or by taking part in an aggressive video game, you should become a more aggressive individual. This is what Cooper and Mackie wanted to test. Now, although there are loads of research methods to go through with Cooper and Mackie, let's keep it simple and just say it was a lab experiment and that the sample consisted of 84 children. So the study itself went like this. Firstly, the participants were all given a questionnaire to ask them about their previous experiences with playing video games. This happened about a week before the study actually started. Then, when the study started, they were split into pairs, and these pairs were randomly allocated. The only thing they made sure of was that the pairs were the same sex and that they were the same grade, so roughly the same age. Consent was gained from the children's parents. Once they were paired up, they were randomly allocated one of two roles. One of the children in the pair would be a player, and one of the children in the pair would be an observer. This would happen for about 8 minutes. Now, the game that they were playing or observing was randomly given to them based on one of 3 conditions. It was either a high aggression condition, where they played a game called Missile Command, very tame by today's standards compared to GTA. They could be put into the low aggression group, which would be Pac-Man, or the control condition, which was a pen and paper maze game. Remember, each pair only had to do one of these 3 games, not all 3. Once this 8 minutes was up, they were moved into one of 2 rooms, and again this was completely randomly chosen, so it could be the player that went in room 1 first, or the observer. Room 1 contained 4 different toys, and they were basically told they could play with any of the toys they wanted, whilst an observer was in the room sorting things out. In reality, they were observing, and what they were observing for was which toy they played with. In room 1, the participants got the opportunity to play with one of 4 toys whilst they didn't realise but they were being observed. The 4 toys were the following. There was an aggressive toy, there was a skill-based toy, there was an active toy, and there was a quiet toy. This part of the study was to see whether playing an aggressive video game in condition 1 would lead to them playing with an aggressive toy in this second condition, therefore supporting social learning theory. Now, room 2 is a little bit tricky, so I'm going to keep it really simple. In room 2, they had to do what's called an interpersonal aggression test, and here they were given 3 behaviours. These included talking back to someone, hitting someone, and stealing something, and they were asked to choose which one they thought was the worst. They were also asked to come up with one of 3 possible punishments for them. In order to choose how bad that punishment had to be, there was a red buzzer, and the longer they pressed that buzzer for, the worse the punishment would be to that person. Obviously this never actually happened, it was just a hypothetical what would you do type of situation, and the whole point of it was to measure how aggressive that individual was, and how aggressive they became as a result of whether they saw or observed an aggressive or not aggressive video game. Again, after several minutes, they swapped rooms and they would do the opposite condition, and finally, that is the end of the procedure for Cooper and Mackie. I would argue probably the most complicated and long-winded procedure in all of GCSE psychology studies. Apart from Daniel et al.
Oh, no, hang on. I've just realised.
What?
I don't want to talk to you anymore.
Now, when it comes to the findings, they are just as complicated as the procedure. There's a lot going on, so I'm going to summarise it with just the key findings here. The most important thing you need to remember is that girls were way more affected than boys when it came to the violent video game. When we measured what kind of toys the children played with, we found that boys were hardly affected by which video game they played, which means whether they played Missile Command, Pac-Man, or the maze game, it didn't really matter, and it didn't really have an effect on which toy they played with in that first room. Girls, however, if they played the violent video game, were much more likely to play with the aggressive toy. That is the most important finding you need to take away. As for the buzzer condition, it didn't really seem to be affected by anything at all. So remember, the key finding is that girls were way more affected by the violent video games than boys. This study also had limitations, mainly being the fact that A, it was quite old, and video games back then were nowhere near as violent as today's standards. We actually have a fancy term for this. It's called temporal validity, and this study has what we call low temporal validity. It simply means that because the study's so old, we may not be able to apply it to today. Other evaluation points include the fact that it had low ecological validity because it was in a lab, which means it didn't reflect a real life environment, but it was very controlled because it was in a lab. Now there's a load of research methods key terms there, and I am planning on doing a massive research methods video soon, so stay on the lookout for that. Now as always, I like to finish up with a real past paper question, and this one tasks you with trying to come up with a limitation of Cooper and Mackie. If you want to give it a go, pause the video right now, otherwise the answers are going to come up on the screen now. And as you can see, the main focus is around giving one limitation, fully explaining that limitation, and also, bonus tip, if it says 1 in bold, please do not give more than one answer. If you end up waffling into 2 or 3 limitations, we will only mark the first one, even if the second and third one are amazing. So please do keep that in mind. As an examiner, I see lots of students missing out on these marks. And so if you want to test your knowledge of Cooper and Mackie, scan the QR code for a free solo booklet. Otherwise, I'll catch you guys in the next video.